Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning back in again. This is the rest of your lecture notes for voter behavior. Once again, all you have to do is fill in the content that happens to appear on your screen and make sure it coincides with your Google Doc, and then also answer any key concept questions that happen to appear as well. Let's go ahead and get started, and remember you can replay any part of this presentation that you might need for detail and clarity later on. So when we look at information on voting behavior, we can get it really from three main sources, and here are those three main sources that help us understand how people vote. The first is results of elections, looking at the actual votes and ballots of how people voted. We can also gain information from a field of survey research. In other words, this pertains to scientific polling of a population or of a demographic. And then we also might be intrigued to find out a little bit more about the studies of political socialization, which of course refers to the types of social aspects of how people might vote or how people gain their political opinions. So for example, for you all as adolescents, you might place a lot of value on your friends and your peer groups at your age, and so therefore that might affect the way that you vote and see the world. Let's go ahead and expand off of that by learning more about the factors that influence voters. There are two basic means of studying voter behavior, and here they are. The first is sociological factors. When we talk about sociological factors, we're talking about the types of voters' personal information, like their characteristics of age, race, income, occupation, education, religion, and so much more. The reason why sociology is important to understand how people vote is because it's not just about the individual, it's also about their group affiliation too. There's a lot of underlying truths and trends to the family makeup of how people vote, to the types of coworkers that you work with in your occupation, to the types of friends that you have too, and what they value as well. We can also look at psychological factors as well as being really important to how people vote. Psychological factors, on the other hand, are different than sociological factors because this pertains to a voter's perception of politics. So sometimes what people perceive to be of their political world is what they go based off of as well. Let's go ahead and break this down nice and easy. Let's look at the first sociological factor that determines how people vote. Here's the breakdown on income and occupation. As a general rule, voters with higher income tend to be Republicans, and voters with lower income tend to be Democrats. The main reason why this might be the case is because, Democrats tend to view government as being important in providing social welfare programs to people who might need that money and assistance, and Republicans don't value an active government in that way, handling those types of issues, so that might cause the divide. On another sociological aspect, of course, let's focus on education. Traditionally, there has been a correlation between higher education voters and backing a Republican candidate. So for example, if a person were to go to school for a law degree and therefore make nicer money, therefore they might be more inclined to vote Republican. However, in the past election that just happened, this was not necessarily the case. Certain people who had higher degrees, say in like fields of academia, voted Democrat than Republican. Some other sociological factors to keep in mind here, let's look at gender. When it comes to gender, here's the breakdown. Women generally tend to favor Democrats by a margin of 5 to 10% in most national elections, which is somewhat of a sizable majority. However, men tend to favor Republicans. But why might this be the case? Well, men and women are more likely to vote differently on specific issues. You see, women and men might view the issues of abortion, healthcare, social welfare, and military involvement quite differently. So, for example, women might look at the issue of abortion and the right to choose as more personal and private than what men would in general. And so, in many ways, this could be enough to alter or deter their vote. Here are some other things to keep in mind in terms of sociological makeup. Age. Traditionally, younger voters tend to favor Democrats, and middle-aged and older voters tend to favor Republicans. I think the main reason why this might be true is because a lot of people can see different values. If you remember the generations video that we watched earlier on in the year, we talked about the different types of values and morals that different generations have off of different events. And then when you look at this chart here and this map, you can see just how people voted across the country in terms of young people between the ages of 18 to 29 and how their vote went down. Some other sociological factors to keep in mind are pertaining to religion. What I mean by that is simply this. As a general rule, if you look at Christianity here, Catholics tend to vote Democrat and Protestants tend to vote Republican. But there are some other truths to religious affiliations that matter just as much as anything. There is this notion that Jewish people tend to vote Republican, and also Muslims people who worship Islam tend to vote Democrat. So there's a little bit of a breakdown here, if you will, from different religions to different denominations to different types of voting patterns. Another thing to keep in mind here, guys, is that ethnicity is just as important in understanding how people might vote as well. Non-whites tend to vote for Democrats, although we should be careful here on how we overgeneralize certain types of demographics. For example, if we go back to the chart here, you can see that not every single demographic group feels the exact same way about politics. In fact, in the 2020 presidential election, I think there was a sizable chunk of Hispanics and Latinos who did vote in favor of the Republican nominee for president. So, although voting information is helpful to understand from an ethnic standpoint, we should be careful as not to overgeneralize. Next here, in terms of sociology, we have to talk about geography and sectionalism as far as the region that you're located in and where you are in the United States. Let's go ahead and explain what this means. Basically, the GOP, or Republicans, tend to control much of the Deep South and also the Midwest, which is a really important region for them. And as you can see by this map here, between the battle between Trump and Clinton, Donald Trump was able to make inways here in the industrial Midwest by winning states like Michigan and Wisconsin, and even our own state of Pennsylvania here. Large cities, however, tend to vote Democrat, so that's why big metropolitan areas like LA and New York tend to vote for liberals or Democrats in that way, thus, of course, shifting the way that that whole state might vote. And suburban and rural people in America might vote Republican, hence why you'll see a large part of the population out there in the middle of the United States, which is farmland or agrarian, voting Republican in this way. Let's go ahead and look at psychological factors now. This is the second part of our presentation when we look at the way that people might perceive political opinions and viewpoints as well. Party identification is really important to people, and so the loyalty that people feel towards a particular political party does matter and does play a certain psychological role. There are many people who tend to vote straight ticket voting all the way, which just means that they practice the voting process of voting for one political party in an election. So when they step into the voting ballot box, they might, of course, see the way that certain people identify as Democrat or Republican, and therefore they might vote for that one person at the top and vote straight Democrat down the ballot or straight Republican down the ballot. And that, of course, pertains to straight ticket voting. There's also people who might do split ticket voting as well, which pertains to people who vote for more than one party on the ballot. So, for example, if they vote for a Democrat at the top, they might vote for Republicans down the ballot as well. And let's not forget about the fact that there's the rise of the independent voter or the moderate. And this is someone, of course, who doesn't pledge allegiance to either political party. They might feel very much so free to vote for whoever they want. And in this way, they have their own autonomy for affecting the way that elections are essentially resulting from. So as you guys can see, these are some of the basic things that combine to form our understanding of how people might vote in elections. And when you look at voter behavior, I think the big takeaway here for this unit is understanding the way upon which people value certain types of characteristics and aspects in their society and in our political world. And understanding what they value gives us great insight into how they might vote. And so only time will tell just how these values and ideologies might shift from one person to another, or from voting demographic to another voting demographic. And either way you look at it, you'll be part of this voting demographic soon as well. Thank you very much for tuning in, and good luck with completing the rest of your lesson.